more or less what we are believing with some.
All right, good afternoon, Earth. This is Adam Sturch broadcasting from the Mushroom Mansion, Taos, New Mexico, working on an oil painting cane. All right, you can see faintly I've drawn in a nice circle with the compass, and I'm going to turn that into an eclipsed sky, eclipsed sun in the sky. Perhaps do some cerulean blue a little bit in here. And I was thinking about this, and I think I want to leave the gestural brush stroke in the interior of the figures pretty raw. And then, whereas Five Hindrances, if you know what painting I'm talking about, had a very detailed interior, I think I'm going to do the surrounding of this outside in rather than inside out, as I did with Five Hindrances. So I'm not quite sure the scenes that I wanted to develop. Had a good idea for Trump, Putin, and Kim Jong on a gallows, sort of in profile behind a burning earth kind of scene that makes sense for the moment, and maybe a few others. But for the moment, I'm going to start with something real simple and easy, and just making that eclipse. I've got some pure white. Just going to edge the circle and then fill it with black, or maybe maybe a little crimson in the black, just a bit.
Which happens naturally without psychedelics is probably accelerated by psychedelics. I think the experience over the past 1,000 years is that ideology is poisonous. You have two kinds of ideologies that we've experimented with over the past 1,000 years. Unsuccessful ones, where I would nominate, I suppose, Christianity, and successful ones, like science. And it turns out whether they're successful or unsuccessful, the consequences for the rest of us are pretty horrendous. The world seen through the lens of ideology is a very limited world, and the great catastrophes of the past 1,000 years have been brought on by ideological errors. That's why, I'm very suspicious of this thing I talked about last night that I called the world corporate state. But on the other hand, the world corporate state seems to be less ideological than any organizing entity that we've seen in a long time. It has no real ideology other than it wants to do business, which is hardly, a cosmic vision.
Yeah. You've had a major shift then as far as corporate states are concerned in the last 10, 20, 30 years. And that is the shareholder is wanting more of the dividends now. The shareholder is also the consumer, wants responsibility of the corporate state. So the management of these corporate states are having to adapt themselves to provide what their shareholders and consumers want.
Yeah, so what you're saying is it's being modified from the bottom up. Yeah. But I think we should, that what electronic culture permits is incredible diversity, and that what the print-created world demanded and created was tremendous suppression of diversity. Print created concepts like the citizen. That's a print-created notion. It created concepts like the public. There was no public before print. That idea didn't even exist. So we now define ourselves as, I'm a member of the public. I'm a citizen. These are very curious categories where you discover yourself a member of very large organizations that you never remember joining. You just sort of were born into it. What the electronic culture empowers is diversity, eccentricity, and a pluralistic kind of mix. And that's very threatening to the print mind, because the print mind is all about controlling through having groups of people that you can deal with. That's why, in a sense, print or television served a print agenda for the first 20 years of its existence, because it was used in the network form, which is only one way to do TV. In that form, the real impact of television could be masked for a long time, because by having millions of people watch the same TV programs, there is a tendency to overcome the deconstructural impulse in TV, and it begins to act like print. Now, of course, that's breaking down, and the only people who watch network TV live in trailer courts. But there was a time when, you see, that's what happened. What was everybody's media 25 years ago has become the media of the lower middle class. And then everybody else, the lower class, has fallen into its own media, underground radio stations, boom boxes, and this. And then the upper echelons of society have gone to computer networks, email, fiber optics, and view-on-demand TV. Television, is, to my mind, the most insidious drug that the 20th century has had to deal with. And it
half
is
crimson, half
the first
ivory.
of the electronic drugs, and its impact. If it were heroin, people would be alarmed. That people are on average watching 6 hours a day of TV, and I don't even think it's a content problem. I think television itself is toxic. It's not how many murders you witness. It's the actual physics. This is what McLeland was always trying to say, that people couldn't understand what he meant when he said that the medium was the message. The message is not the message. The medium was the message. And the effects it had, we have millions of people who are warehoused in almost a larval state in their apartments, watching TV, paying for their medical plans, and glued to this mindless opera of cultural decay that is recited day after day in front of them. It's horrible to imagine. And this is, a creation to some degree of the world corporate state that probably has to be addressed. Yeah.
There's a wonderful book that's just come out called Media Virus by Douglas Rushkoff that addresses this problem really very well.
I haven't read that. I know Doug. His other book, Siberia, is a nice look at cyber culture. Interesting.
What do you think is going to happen with this video tape?
I think that the most important cultural event happening right now is the explosive growth of the internet and the web. The idea that with my $1,200 PowerBook, I can access 3,000 computers around the planet by just plugging into a telephone jack is staggering. This is a revolution of orders of magnitude, and that has happened completely invisibly. Nobody's windows had to be rocked out, no camps had to be established. Nothing appears to have changed. The people who are not switched on don't even know anything has happened. To them, the world looks exactly like it looked 5 years ago. To the people who are switched on, Earth is becoming a distant memory of the internet. Well, the internet is the global brain, the cyber-spatially connected, telepathic, collective domain that we've all been hungering for. It is so powerful, and it has arisen with incredible speed and by a very insidious fashion. First of all, as I mentioned last night, the internet was originally called ARPANET. It was the Advanced Research Projects Agency. It was this super secret military industrial thing that they wanted to survive a thermonuclear attack. And so they designed it to be unkillable. It has no central switching zone. If you blow up a part of it, it just flows around the part you blow up. It is unkillable. So that was ARPA. And now it's become public domain, and it's incredibly empowering for any minority, because you can find your peers. It doesn't matter what you're into. You know, you can play the Shania and join the Shania playing society. So no matter how eccentric your interest, you can find common ground out there. Then the other thing is information that, I'm not kidding you, 10 years ago, the director of the CIA sitting at his desk in Langley, Virginia, didn't have the information processing capacity that you now have plugging into your PowerBook with any phone jack in the world, because these databases are there. And if you know how to surf the net, if you know how to program your no-bots so that while you're sleeping, they're sorting through and visiting various sites and downloading and looking, you cannot believe what's out there. I mean, the entire planet has been turned into a local telephone call. And not only, not to talk to people, but to talk, when you go on to the NCSA main page in Batavia, Illinois, it says available resources. You click on that, and 1,500 computers come on, the names of them, and you just point and click, and now you're talking to that computer. And it tells you that the really interesting thing is being stored on another computer, not in Madrid, but in Singapore. And you point and click. Now you're talking to the main menu in Singapore. You go out onto the net. In the course of an hour of moving on the net, you may circle the planet 10 times and talk to 50 computers all over the world. And you're downloading files, and you're tracing your path so that you can go back. And this is happening. It's been happening for quite some time. 30 million people are out there. And because it requires literacy and technology and money, those 30 million people probably are probably only 10% of the people who rule the planet are not on that net. And it's where the cultural architecture is being put in place now. And it's this invisible space, which is where we should have been building all the time. So I think this is the doorway into the new dimension into which we're going, and that these technologies, put in place for no reason other than to facilitate bank transfers and do incredibly mundane things, are turning out to be the seeds of our electromagnetic body in hyperspace. Yeah.
Can you elaborate on your understanding of virtual cities being designed using computer nets?
Well, it's simply that you want to create an interface with a bunch of data. And a very crude way to do it is to have a page with a list of computers, and you click and you go to the computer. That works, but it's not very sexy. Well, but what if we made a three-dimensional landscape and put buildings in that landscape so that the large red rectangle is the AT&T database, the low violet group of integrated triangles is the National Medical Database. In other words, you simply make the icons three-dimensional and analogous to buildings, and then you can build Data Town, where, instead of a list of computers, they appear to be a long line of skyscrapers lining a broad avenue in which you're driving down in a Ferrari or something. All this will come. I mean, the engineers will do it. How it looks is immaterial. It's that it can be done anyway. Yeah.
Well, from what you're saying, it feels like this is going to be a very intellectual, snobbish, it's going to be elitism. Because there's only going to be for a long time, a certain level of intellectual capacity, illiteracy, and illiterate, educational. So it's going to absolutely pull apart and make the class system even more.
No, I think you're absolutely right that this is happening. This is part of the problem, that what is happening, you see, part of the illusion of the political history of the past 40 years was the illusion that we were all Presbyterians, we all ate white bread, and we all lived in the suburbs, and we all were white folks. And now the society is fragmenting. You're right. There are people who can't read by the millions in this society. Meanwhile, other people are reaching for informational technologies so powerful that they can barely be conceived of. And this is the consequence of political mismanagement. I think the American Union is flying to pieces because the notion of polity was betrayed in the 1960s. And that since the middle of the 1960s, this has been a police state of some sort. You see, after World War II, and they kicked Hitler's ass and all that, then everybody came back full of idealism to raise families, to build America. They'd been through the New Deal. There was a modicum of social responsibility and consciousness hammered into the middle class. And everybody came back. And then the American political system went haywire. And basically because we lost our nerve. My generation, I'm 48. I went to the University of California at Berkeley in 1965. My generation was the beneficiary of the idea that you should give a universal education to everybody. And they discovered that if you do that, if you take everybody and make them read Plato and John Stuart Mill and Voltaire and Hobbes, as we did, that, you can't rule such people. They take it too seriously. They become ungovernable. They pour into the streets screaming about their rights. And so in the aftermath of the suppression of the counterculture of the 60s, it was decided that the goal of universal public education and the building of a population intelligent enough to run a democracy, that would all be abandoned. And the universities would be turned into trade schools. And people would be given MBAs and incorporated into the corporate state. But no more John Stuart Mill. No more of that. And the consequences of this have been to create a historyless and illiterate lower middle class, where before the lower middle class was the pool of our intellectual creativity. That's where John Steinbeck came from, and Henry Miller, and all of the people who drove the evolution of cultural values. So, and, we could talk endlessly about what went wrong in the 60s or why we were turned into a police state. But now, the impulse of those kinds of repressive states is to forestall change. And change has been forestalled in America to the point where now, when it comes, it's going to be explosive, uncontrollable, revolutionary. We will be lucky to get through this political cycle of this without having to hang some of these people. You mean that there is this tremendous, now we're going to have the change. Yeah, the change which should have been spread out over 30 years is now going to come in the next 5, no matter who it hurts, no matter how chaotic it is. Well, I don't know how we got off on that. The role of psychedelics in all of this is that it erodes loyalty to the models of the tribe. And so we are the people who can see, and there may be others, I'm not claiming exclusivity for the psychedelic community, but the psychedelic community loudly proclaims that the emperor has no clothes. This is all a con game. That this junk-dealing, hyper-media-obsessed, nitwit society is an unfit environment for delinquent 14-year-olds, let alone for the rest of us. And this is news they don't like to hear. Well, I think these things are always more interesting if they're driven by the
so
agendas
that gives a
of the
little
people
definition
here.
and contrast
You
between
got
the figure
fairly
and the background,
inventive me
and
this
sets up the
morning.
eclipse and a
If
nice
there are any
little
areas that
corner
you want to bring
of
into
retained
focus,
deep color
this
to
is
sort
a
of
good
offset
time
the
to
composition.
suggest it. Otherwise,
And I'm liking the idea of having a slow,
diatribe,
still plant,
like
tree
that, yes.
growing out of the crack, or where there will be a crack in
There's
this
a book,
figure's head.
which I'm not sure it's been
And that's sort of
published yet,
setting
but
the
you should
stage
all
for the
watch
scenes in the
it. I
background.
hope we'll make a
And I like the
revolution
idea of
in
the
ayahuasca
contrast of the
awareness.
dramatic
It's
motion
called The
pose
Three
with
Halves
something
of
still and
Emotion.
frozen
And it was
in the moment.
translated by a good friend.
So I'm going
of
to keep
many
playing with
people
ideas
in
for
this
this,
room.
and
Ken
see
Simon
about gallows
translated
and
it.
putting
And it's by the Peruvian poet
some
Cesar
nefarious political
Calvo.
figures on
And
the rope,
it is
as
a
it seems
book
to be
about
about to play out in the
ayahuasca that
world.
could
If
easily
it
win
doesn't,
the
God help
Nobel
us all.
Prize for Literature.
So anyway, thanks for
It's
watching.
not
That's
some
Adam Sturch, podcasting from Mushroom Ranch in Taos, New Mexico,
anthropological
working on oil painting
reportage.
cane.
It's
Have a good
art
evening, Earth.
and